Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Now, the title for this video might have clued some of you in on the fact that this is not my usual content. It's not what I normally put up on this channel. But I'm uploading this on the 4th of October 2019. And that is the day that the European Dyslexia Association has chosen to be World Dyslexia Awareness Day. If you're based in the UK like I am, then the British Dyslexia Association has chosen next week as Dyslexia Awareness Week. And they have some great suggestions about things that you can do to support your colleagues and also your students who may have dyslexia. I'll be sure to leave links to them in my description box, and I'll also talk about the ideas that they have. And one of the things they talk about is how important narratives are and visibility. And that inspired me to make this video, because today I want to talk about my own journey with dyslexia. My dyslexia diagnosis came pretty late. In fact, I wasn't assessed and diagnosed until I'd already started my doctoral studies. So what I can talk more about is what it's like to grow up and live as an undiagnosed dyslexic. Some of my earliest memories are of feeling like I wasn't quite the same as everybody else, that they seemed to find things easier or certainly more instinctive than I did. Very basic things like reading an analog clock or telling left from right. I could do it, but I knew that it took more thought than it did for other people. Even now, I will sometimes confuse left and right. When it came to learning my times tables, it was a particular form of hell for me. And in fact, I still don't know many of my times tables off the top of my head. I find numbers incredibly difficult and confusing. I will frequently invert them or swap them around. When there's a long chain of numbers that I need to note down, I will often make mistakes and put numbers in the wrong places. When it comes to dates, that can also be a bit of a nightmare. I frequently have had to refilm things for this channel because I have said that something happened in 1400 and something when it actually happened in 1500 and something. I might confuse 1542 with 1524. All of these things will happen and I'll know the real date, and when I hear myself say it back, I will realise that I've made a mistake and have to go back and reshoot. When I was about 6 or 7, I had a teacher and she was only at the school for a year. And she set spelling homework. Spelling homework is, of course, quite normal. But the way she set it, I remember it very clearly, was to give us comic strips to draw and fill out. So every weekend, I'd be sat at the kitchen table with my supportive, long-suffering and unspeakably patient mother as we drew out these pictures. And then you'd add text to it, and in the text you had to include the spellings for that week. And then you'd have to make sure that you learnt those spellings. And the spellings would never go in. The comic strip didn't help. And so we would have tears before bedtime most Sunday nights before I had to go in and do the spelling test. And 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't do amazingly well. A narrative started to be developed between my parents and me and the school. And at parents' evenings and in school reports, I got talked about like I was two different people. I would have the person that they saw in their classroom speaking to them, who they described as being articulate and engaged, and if I do say so myself, funny. And then there was the person who wrote the essays that got handed in, and they talked about how this wasn't the same person, that I needed to apply myself more, that I should avoid doing my homework at the last minute, and that really I should just be a little bit less lazy. And so this narrative of a lazy last-minute writer began to follow me around. It followed me when I turned 11 and went into senior school, and it was there in my GCSE year. A teacher asked me if I'd done the homework the night before. He accused me of it, in fact, and I said, absolutely not. I started this the night you set it, and I have been working on it until I put it in. And he scoffed disbelievingly and said, what are you, dyslexic? Which I'm sure that no dyslexia charity would approve of a teacher doing. But what it also did, as well as making me feel pretty small, it made me think, well, maybe I am just lazy. If I worked harder for the time that I worked on this, it would have been better. Because the last thing I want to be is dyslexic, because this is worthy of being laughed at. what it certainly wasn't going to drive me to do was get assessed for dyslexia. A-levels were also particularly hard. It was a step up in difficulty. There was more coursework, more exams, and I have always found exams truly, truly frightening. The thought of having to write out under time pressure makes me, frankly, come out in a cold sweat. I often find when I'm writing things down by hand that my hand will still be up here and my brain is down here. So I'll frequently miss out bits from sentences in the argument I'm trying to make. And when I read over it to proofread it, I will miss the fact that I've done this because my brain will fill in the gap. So I'm frequently turning in work that has lots of mistakes in it. Even with word processing, I will frequently miss out words, and spell check won't pick that up. So occasionally the sentence doesn't really seem to have any meaning because I've jumped between ideas and not put the filler in. Also, with the spell check function, when it offers you 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of a word that's spelled correctly and they all look the same to you, it's very difficult for me anyway to choose the word that would be correct. I didn't want to go to university. I had absolutely no plans. My schooling had been, frankly, quite crushing. My parents had always said, you must do what you want, and I'm so thankful for their support and also for the fact that they didn't get angry when teachers were saying that I was being lazy. I can't imagine actually how that would have played out if they had sided with teachers and said, well, you must try harder, you're just lazy. They'd always told me that they believed in me and that I would do my best. And I think that's probably the reason why I was actually able to go on to university. I had my parents supporting me, but I also had an amazing group of friends at school who sat me down and said, well, you filled in your UCAS form, you've done your personal statement, we aren't giving you the option. Pick some universities. We don't even care which ones, you're applying. And one of the ones that I applied to was the university that I ended up going to, that I did my master's at, and then also my doctoral studies. My friends, some of them are pretty smug about the fact that I now have a PhD and I didn't want to go to university until they convinced me. But I sat my exams and I got the grades I needed, which no one was more surprised about than me, and off I toddled to university. And at degree level, everything seemed a bit easier because we had lots more time to read and to work, and everything virtually was word processed. I made a conscious decision to avoid taking courses that had exams. In my whole degree course, I sat one exam, and that was in my first year. The rest of the time, I was working on the basis of coursework. And so I was able to achieve, I think, better grades than I would have done if I had sat exams. I took a year out and then was ready, geared up to go back and do a part-time master's. I knew instinctively that I would need to do it part-time, even without the diagnosis, because I'd seen the reading lists and I knew that to get the most out of it, it would be too much for me to try and cram it all into 1 year. Over the 2 years, I could plan on my final master's essay and I could work on it over the first summer and then over the second summer. So even without knowing it, I was trying to find workarounds for my learning difficulty to enable me to go and do my master's, even without knowing that I had the difficulty. At MA, I was working in much smaller groups, and so I was very aware of my peers. And I also think I had my own confidence growing. So I'm sat in these classrooms and I know that I understand the material as well, if not better, than the majority of people who are surrounding me. And so you can imagine my surprise and dismay when it comes to getting my master's results and I don't do as well as I thought. And so that left me asking, so what's going on here? And I actually thought back to that GCSE teacher who'd laughed at me and said, what are you, dyslexic? And by this point, I was just a few months into my doctoral studies because I went straight from MA into PhD. And so I thought, well, I'll get assessed. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to go very far because my university had its own dyslexia assessment centre. And I'm not sure if that's the case of all universities, but I really think it should be. So I go down and I submit myself for assessment. And the first thing they do is they give you a little clipboard with a sheet, and it's a checklist of things, yes or no. And the list of symptoms is there, do you have it, yes or no? And I'm ticking yes, 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 all the way down. A few that I could tick no on. But as I'm sitting there looking at this list of what I realise, of course, are dyslexia symptoms, I find myself going, I had no idea, but it all makes sense now. Before I even went in for the full assessment, this checklist told me that I absolutely was dyslexic. I hand the checklist over, it's looked at with a cocked eyebrow, and I am submitted for formal assessment. I was unsurprised when I got the diagnosis of dyslexia. I think, to be honest, that the very fact that I put myself forward for assessment must mean that, at least on some level, I was aware that I was dyslexic before I had the test. What did surprise me was actually how swiftly and how helpfully the big lumbering university machine mobilised to help me. It felt like almost immediately I was sat in front of somebody who had the educational psychologist report in front of them, and they wanted to find out what they could do to help me, what support they could put in place, what tools they could offer, what equipment they could give me for free to help me achieve my full potential. I try very hard to avoid thinking shoulda, woulda, coulda. But I'll be honest, sometimes I do find myself meandering down that path and wondering what my life would have looked like if I'd got my dyslexia diagnosis earlier, say when I was 6 or 7. What would it have looked like if I'd been able to have extra time in exams, if my examiners had been informed that I was dyslexic, if my teachers had known, if I'd been able to type up exams, if I had also been able to have text as an audio form as well as a written form. Would I have done better in my exams? Possibly. What certainly would have happened, I hope, is that teachers wouldn't have gone, well, it's like you're two people and one of you is lazy and last minute. Because carrying around that baggage of being called lazy and last minute, I genuinely believe caused far more harm than dyslexia ever did. I think it also complicated things for me later in life. I struggle day to day with imposter syndrome and anxiety. I'm always waiting to be found out. And I think that that's probably because I spent so much of my young life being told that I was being lazy and that I was doing things last minute. So even when I have worked on something extraordinarily hard, almost to the point of exhaustion, I'm just waiting for somebody to call me out on that very same thing. And that's quite a heavy burden to bear, I'll be honest. But I don't want to feel too sorry for myself, because what absolutely helped with getting the dyslexia diagnosis, however late it came, was it certainly helped me to achieve my doctoral studies and earn my PhD. With this knowledge, I was empowered. I was able to say, well, I'm going to need extra help with this, and to not feel embarrassed about it. So I could go to my friends, my family, my then boyfriend, now my husband, and ask them to proofread stuff. My poor, long-suffering boyfriend, now my husband, read my doctoral thesis of 100,000 words 3 times. He was checking for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Things that I knew it was now okay for me to admit I had problems with. I still find punctuating sentences and using appropriate grammar to be quite difficult. And sometimes it feels a little bit arbitrary to me, I'll be completely honest. I can speak fluently, as I hope I show on this channel, but writing is still a challenge for me. In fact, perhaps my dyslexia is the reason why I make YouTube. I am so passionate about history and literature and literary culture, and this for me is a way that I can talk. I can express my ideas, I can talk about the things that I've found in ways that are certainly more fluent than they would be if I was trying to write them down. This works for me, and I hope it also works for you too. But with this being Dyslexia Awareness Day, going into Dyslexia Awareness Week, this is a call to arms as well. If you think you might be dyslexic, if you think that a friend or family member, a student or a colleague might have dyslexia, then encourage them in a kind way to get assessed. Because dyslexia and the diagnosis is not the end of the chapter. For me, it was just the beginning. Knowing that I was dyslexic meant that I felt that I was able to work in a way that suited me, rather than attempting to fit my work into the particular formulaic way that other people worked. When it came to my doctoral thesis, I stopped thinking about it as chapters. I'd been told that I was a visual learner and that that was fine. And so I stopped thinking of it as chapters and started thinking of it as an exhibition, that you move room to room and try to tell a visual story in this very physical way. And that worked for me. So getting that diagnosis absolutely changed my life for the better. And I hope that if any of you are struggling with undiagnosed dyslexia, that this might give you the impetus to go and get assessed yourselves. Now, I'm just one case, and I'm by no means an expert on dyslexia because I've only realised that I've had it for the last few years. But I hope that with my one story, you can start writing your own story, or speaking it aloud, whatever suits you better. As I said earlier though, the British Dyslexia Association is having their Dyslexia Awareness Week next week. And here are some of the things that they suggest that you can do in your workplace or school to help people who are diagnosed with dyslexia or who are undiagnosed but have dyslexia. And here's their website, and here's what they say you can do. For Dyslexia Awareness Week 2019, the British Dyslexia Association is asking schools and workplaces to put aside half an hour to explore how to empower dyslexia in the organisation, maximising the value it brings. Between Monday the 7th and Friday the 11th of October, we hope you will take a moment during a breakfast, lunch break, assembly or class to share information about dyslexia using our Dyslexia Awareness Week packs. Invite relevant people to share their thoughts on dyslexia, including a dyslexia pupil or member of staff discussing what being dyslexic in the organisation is like, including the strengths it brings. Senior dyslexic member of the organisation talking about how dyslexia has played a role in their success and what has empowered them. Member of the HR or special education needs team talking about what support is available to people with dyslexia or that suspect they may be dyslexic. Set some time aside to invite questions and comments from everyone participating. And then they also have links on running an empowering dyslexia session. I will leave links to this website in the description box down below. I really like the fact that they ask people to talk about how dyslexia played a role in their success, because I certainly think it played a role in mine. Because I was undiagnosed for so long, I had to find workarounds. I really love that fact about myself, that when I am faced with a problem where the obvious solution isn't working, because I was an undiagnosed dyslexic for so long, I've always had to find different routes. So if this one doesn't work, I'll find another or another or another. Equally, because I find processing information quite difficult, I am somebody who is prepared to reread and reread or ask questions. I want to understand because I spent so long finding that understanding and comprehension difficult. So I will always ensure that I've understood and also understood within context. And I think that that makes me a pretty strong historian. Because of my challenges with the written word, it's driven me to make YouTube. I have learned to self-shoot and also self-edit video. And for that, I'm also truly grateful. I think that being an undiagnosed dyslexic made me who I am. And I am truly grateful now that I have got the diagnosis because I understand a little bit more about myself, and that's always a good thing. So before I wrap this video up, I just want to repeat the couple of call to arms that I've talked about in this video. First and foremost, I want you to go over to the British Dyslexia Association website. I'll leave the links in the description box, as I said, and look at what you can do for Dyslexia Awareness Week. And when you do something, please come back and tell me what you've done. Let me know in the comments section or come and find me over on my social media. I'll leave those links in the description box as well. You can follow me there and we can continue that conversation. And I want to remind you of the other call to action as well. If you think you may be dyslexic, please reach out for help and assessment. Equally, if you think that someone you know may be dyslexic, then privately, kindly and supportively, please encourage them to get assessed as well. It shouldn't, but dyslexia does still carry a stigma. From my own personal experience, getting assessed and diagnosed was one of the best things I ever did. Dyslexia and its diagnosis did not shut down opportunities or close doors on me. Rather, it opened up horizons. It flung open the doors and flung open the windows because I had the opportunity to understand myself better. With that knowledge, I was empowered to reach my full potential, and I am so truly grateful for that. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, that you'll let me know by hitting the thumbs up button, by subscribing to this channel, and also clicking the bell icon so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I do hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.